The sun was bleeding into the horizon, painting the sprawling plains of Whispering Pines Ranch in shades of amber and gold. Amara Langley stood on the warped wooden porch, her boots scuffing against the grain as she stared out at the land that had once been her everything. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and dust, tugging at the loose strands of her dark hair. At 38, she was a widow with a fortune $10 million, left behind when her husband Ethan's plane went down in a fiery crash 2 years back. But all that money couldn't buy her peace. The ranch, once a paradise built on love and sweat, now loomed around her like a gilded prison, its silence louder than any storm. She'd woken that morning with the same ache in her chest, the kind that didn't fade with coffee or sunlight. The ranch hands moved about their tasks quiet, efficient shadows, but they couldn't fill the void Ethan had left. Amara was sipping her coffee, the mug warm against her palms, when she saw him, a figure cutting through the dawn haze, tall and broad, walking with a purpose that made her breath catch. Strangers didn't come to Whispering Pines, not anymore. He stopped a few yards from the porch, dust settling around his boots. Up close, he was a mountain of a man, 6'9", with shoulders that strained the seams of his worn flannel shirt. His face was all hard angles, kissed by the sun and scarred by time, but his eyes stopped her cold, green as the pines that gave the ranch its name. They shimmered with something raw, something haunting. "Mom," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel under a wagon wheel. He tipped his hat, a faded thing that had seen better days. "Name's Caleb Morrow. Heard you might need a hand around here." Amara set her mug down, the clink against the railing too loud in the stillness. "What makes you think I'm hiring?" she asked, crossing her arms. She didn't mean to sound sharp, but trust came slow these days. Caleb shifted his weight, those green eyes meeting hers without flinching. "Lost my job at Double Bar Ranch a ways back. They couldn't keep me on. I'm good with my hands, and I don't ask for much, just a fair wage and a place to lay my head." She studied him, taking in the calluses on his hands, the way his jaw tightened as he spoke. There was a hunger in his voice, a quiet desperation that tugged at something deep inside her. The ranch didn't need another worker. She had enough hands to keep it running. But those eyes, damn those eyes, made her hesitate. "I've got a barn," she said at last, her voice softer than she intended. "You can stay there for now. We'll see if you're worth keeping around." A flicker of relief crossed his face, softening the hard lines. "Thank you, Mom. I won't let you down." As he turned to go, she called after him, "Caleb." He paused, glancing back. "Yes, Mom. Call me Amara." A faint smile curved his lips, barely there but warm enough to stir something in her chest. "Yes, Amara." The days that followed were a blur of motion. Caleb didn't just work. He poured himself into the ranch like it was his own. He patched up the sagging fences with a precision that left the other hands nodding in approval. The old tractor, a rusting relic Ethan had cursed 100 times, roared back to life under Caleb's hands. He moved among the cattle with a gentleness that didn't match his size, coaxing them with low murmurs and steady touches. From her kitchen window, Amara watched him. She couldn't help it. There was something about the way he carried himself strong as an oak, yet graceful in a way that made her pulse quicken. She'd catch herself staring at the flex of his arms as he swung an axe, or the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed with the hands. It was a pull she hadn't felt in years, one that scared her as much as it thrilled her. But with every glance, guilt clawed at her. Ethan's face flashed in her mind, his easy smile, the way he'd pull her close under the stars. He'd been gone 2 years, but his ghost lingered in every corner of Whispering Pines. What would people say if they saw her looking at Caleb like that? What would Vivian say, as if summoned by the thought? Vivian's car rolled up the dirt drive that afternoon, kicking up a cloud of dust. Ethan's sister stepped out, her sharp heels sinking into the earth. Her lips pursed in that familiar mix of worry and judgment. "Amara," she said, brushing past the pleasantries. "We need to talk." Amara leaned against the porch rail, bracing herself. "What's on your mind?" "Vivian. That man you've got working here. Caleb Morrow." Vivian's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping like she was sharing a secret. "Do you even know who he is?" "He's a worker," Amara said, a little too fast. "He's good at what he does. Fixed the tractor in a day, something your brother never managed." Vivian's brow arched. "Is that all he's good for?" People are starting to talk. "Amara, a widow alone with a stranger like that, it doesn't look right." "Let them talk," Amara shot back, heat rising in her chest. "I'm not breaking any laws." "Not yet," Vivian said, her tone icy. "But you're dancing on thin ice. Ethan's memory deserves more respect than this." The words hit like a slap. Amara's throat tightened, but she held Vivian's gaze. "Ethan's gone. Viv, I loved him with everything I had. But I can't keep living like he's still here." Vivian's lips thinned. "Just watch yourself. You don't know what kind of trouble you're inviting in." She left without another word, her car disappearing down the drive. Amara stood there, the wind whipping at her hair, her mind a tangle of anger and doubt. Vivian wasn't wrong, taking in a man like Caleb was a risk. But there was something about him, something she couldn't shake. That evening, she found him on the porch, a piece of wood in his hands and a knife carving away at it. The sun had dipped low, bathing him in a soft, golden light that made him look almost unreal. "What are you making?" she asked, easing down beside him. "A whistle," he said, holding up the half-finished shape. "For the kids in town. They get a kick out of 'em." She smiled despite herself. "You're good with your hands." He chuckled, a low rumble that sent a shiver through her. "Gotta be. Grew up in an orphanage, learned to make do with what I had." Her heart twisted. "That sounds rough." "It was," he said simply, his eyes on the wood. "But it taught me to hold on to what matters, to fight for it." They sat there, the quiet stretching between them, comfortable and warm. The coyotes started their chorus in the distance, a wild song that matched the thud of her pulse, for the first time in years. Amara felt the ranch breathing again, alive with something new, something dangerous. "Caleb," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm glad you're here." He turned to her, those green eyes locking onto hers, deep and searching. "Me too." "Amara." "Me too." The stars were spilling across the sky now, bright and endless. And as they sat there, side by side, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, Whispering Pines was waking up from its long, lonely sleep. The stars hung heavy over Whispering Pines, their light pooling across the ranch like spilled silver. Amara lay awake in her bed, the quilt pulled tight to her chest, the memory of Caleb's voice low and warm, saying, "Me too," Amara echoing in her mind. Sleep wouldn't come. The house creaked around her, its timbers whispering secrets she wasn't ready to hear. She rose, slipping into a shawl, and padded to the kitchen window. The barn was a dark silhouette against the night, but a faint glow flickered from within. Caleb was still awake. She shouldn't go out there. She knew it. A woman alone, crossing the yard to a stranger's makeshift room in the dead of night, it was the kind of thing that would set tongues wagging in town. But her feet moved anyway, drawn by a pull she couldn't name. The grass was cool under her bare soles, the air sharp with the scent of pine and earth. She knocked softly on the barn door, her heart thudding so loud she was sure he'd hear it before she spoke. Caleb, her voice was a whisper, almost lost to the wind. The door creaked open, and there he stood, shirt untucked, his hair mussed from running a hand through it. Those green eyes caught the lantern light, glinting like polished jade. "Amara," he said, surprise softening his tone. "Everything all right, I couldn't sleep," she admitted, wrapping her shawl tighter. "Saw your light. Thought, maybe you couldn't either." He stepped aside, gesturing to the small space he'd claimed in the barn, a cot, a wooden crate for a table, and a single lantern casting shadows on the hay-strewn floor. "Ain't much, but it's home for now. Want to sit?" She hesitated, then nodded, perching on the edge of a hay bale. The air smelled of leather and wood smoke, and something distinctly Caleb earthy, warm, alive. He settled across from her, his large frame making the space feel smaller, more intimate. "Never thought I'd end up in a place like this," he said, his voice breaking the quiet, whispering pines. "It's something special, like it's got a heart of its own." Amara smiled faintly, her fingers tracing the edge of her shawl. "It used to feel that way. When Ethan was here, this place was alive. Now it's just heavy." Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze steady. "You carry it well. Though, this ranch, all of it. Most folks would have buckled under that weight." Her throat tightened. She wasn't used to compliments. Not anymore. "I don't know about that. Some days, I feel like I'm just going through the motions." He didn't reply right away. Just watched her, his eyes searching. "You ever think about what you want, Amara? Not the ranch, not what folks expect, just you." The question hit her like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples through her chest. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. What did she want for so long? It had been about survival, keeping the ranch running, honoring Ethan's memory, proving she could stand alone. But now, with Caleb sitting across from her, his presence filling the barn like a warm fire, she felt something shift inside her, something dangerous and alive. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't let myself think about it." He nodded, as if he understood more than she'd said. "Maybe it's time you did." The next morning, the ranch hummed with its usual rhythm. Cattle lowing, the distant clang of a hammer, the hands calling to each other across the corral. Amara threw herself into work, checking ledgers and inspecting the new fencing Caleb had put up. His craftsmanship was undeniable. Every post was straight, every wire taut. She caught herself watching him again as he worked with the horses, his hands steady and gentle, coaxing a skittish mare with a patience that made her chest ache. By noon, the heat was fierce, the sun baking the earth until it shimmered. Amara brought a jug of water to the field, her boots kicking up dust with every step. Caleb was shirtless now, his skin glistening with sweat, muscles shifting as he drove a post into the ground. She froze, the jug heavy in her hands, heat rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. He glanced up, catching her stare, and a slow grin spread across his face. "You gonna share that water, or just stand there gawking?" She laughed, the sound surprising her, and tossed him the jug. "Don't get cocky. Morrow. I'm just making sure you don't pass out on my land." He caught it easily, taking a long drink, water spilling down his chin and chest. "Much obliged," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. His eyes held hers a moment too long, and she felt that pull again, stronger now, like a current she couldn't fight. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small moments, his hand brushing hers as they passed tools. The way he'd tip his hat with a playful smirk when she gave an order. Each touch, each glance was a spark, building a fire she wasn't sure she could contain. But with every spark came a shadow, Vivian's words, the town's whispers, the weight of Ethan's memory. She could feel the eyes of the other ranch hands, curious and wary, watching their every move. That evening, as the sky burned red, Amara found Caleb by the creek that ran through the ranch. He was skipping stones, the flat rocks skimming across the water with a grace that belied his size. She approached quietly, her heart pounding in a way that felt both foreign and familiar. "You're good at that," she said, settling on a rock nearby. "Practice," he replied, tossing another stone. It skipped 4 times before sinking. "Used to do this as a kid. Only thing that kept me sane some days." She watched the ripples spread, her mind drifting to his words from the night before. What did she want? The question had haunted her all day, weaving through her thoughts like a stubborn thread. "Caleb," she said, her voice soft, "what do you want? You said you learned to hold on to what matters. What's that for you?" He paused, the stone in his hand stilling. For a moment, he looked almost vulnerable, the hardness in his face softening. "A home," he said at last. "Not just a roof, but a place where I belong, where I'm wanted." The simplicity of it broke something in her. She wanted to tell him he was wanted here, with her, but the words caught in her throat, tangled with guilt and fear. Instead, she reached for a stone and tossed it, watching it skip once before plopping into the water. Caleb chuckled. "Gotta flick your wrist more. Like this." He stepped behind her, his hand gently guiding hers, showing her the motion. His touch was warm, steady, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the feel of his calloused fingers against her skin. She turned, their faces inches apart, his breath warm against her cheek. "Amara," he murmured, his voice rough with something unspoken. Her name on his lips felt like a promise, a question, a plea. She pulled back, her heart racing, the air between them charged with unspoken things. "I should go," she said, stepping away, her voice shaky. "It's late." He didn't stop her, but his eyes followed her as she retreated to the house, the weight of his gaze heavy on her back. As she reached the porch, she glanced back, catching the silhouette of him against the creek, a lone figure under the vast starry sky. Whispering Pines was changing, and so was she, whether she was ready for it or not. The night air clung to Amara's skin as she hurried back to the house, her footsteps uneven on the dew-slick grass. Caleb's silhouette by the creek lingered in her mind, his murmured Amara echoing like a heartbeat she couldn't silence. She shut the door behind her, leaning against it, her chest tight with a storm of emotions: want, fear, guilt, all swirling together under the weight of the starlit sky. Whispering Pines had always been her sanctuary, but now it felt alive with something wild, something she couldn't control. She pressed her fingers to her lips, where the ghost of Caleb's breath still lingered, and wondered how she'd let things get this far. Morning broke with a restless energy, the sun clawing its way through heavy clouds that promised rain. Amara threw herself into chores, hoping the rhythm of work would drown out the chaos in her head. She scrubbed the kitchen counter until her hands ached, checked the ledgers twice, and rode out to inspect the cattle, anything to keep her mind off the man in the barn. But Caleb was everywhere. His laughter drifted from the corral, where he was teaching a young ranch hand how to mend a bridle. His broad frame filled the doorway of the stable as he hauled hay, his shirt clinging to his sweat-dampened back. Every glance was a spark, and she was kindling, waiting to catch fire. By midday, the clouds had thickened, casting the ranch in a moody grey. Amara was in the barn, sorting tools, when Caleb appeared, his presence filling the space like thunder. He carried a coil of rope over his shoulder, his eyes catching hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "Storm's coming," he said, nodding toward the darkening sky. "I'll get the horses in. You need anything else done before it hits?" She shook her head, her voice caught somewhere between her heart and her throat. "You've done enough, Caleb. More than enough." He paused, studying her, his gaze sharp enough to cut through her defenses. "You sure about that? Seems like you're carrying something heavier than this ranch." The words struck too close, unraveling the fragile wall she'd built around herself. She turned away, busying her hands with a rusty wrench, but Caleb stepped closer, his boots scuffing the hay-strewn floor. "Amara," he said softly, "you don't have to keep running from it. Whatever's eating at you, you can tell me." Her fingers tightened around the wrench, the cold metal grounding her. "You don't know me, Caleb. You don't know what I've lost." "Then tell me," he urged, his voice low, urgent. "I'm not here to judge you. I'm here because I want to be." The air between them crackled, heavy with unspoken truths. She wanted to spill it all, the ache of Ethan's absence, the guilt that clawed at her every time she looked at Caleb, the fear that letting herself feel again would betray everything she'd built. But before she could speak, the barn door slammed open, and Vivian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Amara." Her sister-in-law stood in the doorway, her face a mask of fury, raindrops clinging to her coat from the first spits of the storm. "What in God's name is going on here?" Amara's heart plummeted. "Vivian, what are you doing here?" Vivian's eyes darted between Amara and Caleb, narrowing with suspicion. "I came to check on you, but clearly I should have come sooner. People are talking. Amara, they're saying you're throwing yourself at this drifter." She spat the word like it was poison, her gaze raking over Caleb's towering frame. Caleb stiffened, but his voice stayed calm. Steady. Mom, I'm just here to work. Ain't no cause for trouble. Trouble. Vivian laughed, sharp and cold. You're the trouble. Mr. Morrow, you think I don't see what's happening? You're preying on a widow's loneliness, and she's too grief-stricken to see it. Enough. Amara's voice cracked like a whip, startling even herself. She stepped between them, her hands trembling with a fury she hadn't felt in years. Vivian, you don't get to come into my home and accuse me of anything. Caleb's done nothing but help this ranch more than you've ever done. Vivian's lips parted, shock flashing across her face before it hardened again. You're making a fool of yourself, Amara. Ethan's barely cold in his grave, and you're letting this man worm his way into your life. What would your husband think? The mention of Ethan was a knife to Amara's heart, twisting deep. She felt Caleb's presence behind her, solid and warm, but she couldn't look at him, not now, not with Vivian's words tearing open old wounds. Get out, she said, her voice low and shaking. Get off my land. Vivian's eyes widened, but she didn't back down. You'll regret this, she hissed. You're ruining everything Ethan built. And for what? A man who'll leave you the second he gets what he wants. She stormed out, the barn door slamming shut behind her, leaving a silence that roared louder than the approaching storm. Amara's knees buckled, and she sank onto a hay bale, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Caleb knelt beside her, his hand hovering near her shoulder, hesitant to touch. Amara, he said, his voice soft but firm. You don't have to listen to her. You know who you are. Do I? She whispered, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She's right about one thing. People are talking. They'll tear me apart for this. Caleb. For you. Then let 'em talk, he said, his voice fierce now, his green eyes blazing. You're stronger than their gossip. You're stronger than you know. She looked up at him, her heart pounding, caught between fear and something deeper, something reckless. And then he said it. The words that shattered the fragile world she'd been clinging to. I'm not going anywhere. Amara. Not unless you tell me to. Her breath caught, the weight of a promise sinking into her bones. But before she could respond, a shout rang out from the yard, a ranch hand, his voice sharp with panic. Amara, Caleb. The cattle, they're loose, the fence is down, and they're heading for the ravine. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, grabbing his hat and rope. Stay here, he told her. But Amara was already moving, her boots pounding the dirt as she followed him into the storm. The rain was falling now, hard and cold, turning the ground to mud. Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the chaos cattle stampeding toward the ravine, their hooves thundering like a heartbeat gone wild. Caleb swung onto a horse, his movements swift and sure, and Amara mounted another, her pulse racing as they rode into the fray. The rain stung her face, blurring her vision, but she could see Caleb ahead, his silhouette cutting through the storm like a hero from some forgotten tale. He lassoed a stray calf with a flick of his wrist, guiding it back toward safety, but the herd was too wild, too panicked. Amara. Stay back, he shouted, but she ignored him, urging her horse closer to the ravine's edge. A steer broke free, charging toward the drop, and she leaned low, her rope flying through the air. It caught the beast's horns, and she pulled hard, her arms burning with the effort. Caleb was at her side in a heartbeat, his hands steadying the rope, their shoulders brushing as they fought the storm together. When the last of the cattle was secured, they collapsed against a fence post, soaked and breathless, the rain still pounding down. Caleb's laughter broke the silence, wild and free, and Amara couldn't help but join him, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world was just them two souls caught in the storm, bound by something neither could name. But as the thunder rolled, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man Amara didn't recognize, his face half hidden under a dripping hat. "Caleb Morrow," he called, his voice cutting through the rain, sharp and dangerous. "You thought you could hide forever." Caleb's laughter died, his body tensing beside her. Amara's heart lurched, the stranger's words hanging like a noose in the air. Who was this man, and what did he want with Caleb? The rain lashed down in sheets, turning the ground beneath Amara's boots into a slick, muddy trap. The stranger's words, "You thought you could hide forever," hung heavy in the air, sharp as the lightning splitting the sky. Caleb stood rigid beside her, his jaw tight, his green eyes locked on the man who'd emerged from the storm. The cattle were safe, corralled back from the ravine's edge, but the tension in the air was thicker than the mud clinging to their clothes. Amara's heart pounded, her mind racing with questions she didn't dare ask, not yet. "Who are you?" she demanded, stepping forward, her voice cutting through the storm's roar. The stranger was lean, his face weathered and shadowed under a sodden hat, but his eyes gleamed with a dangerous edge. He ignored her, his gaze fixed on Caleb. "Been a long time." "Morrow," the man said, his voice low and gravelly, like he'd smoked one too many cigars. "Didn't think I'd find you playing cowboy on some widow's ranch." Caleb's hand twitched toward the rope still coiled at his hip, but he didn't move. "Whatever you're here for." "Jonas, it's got nothing to do with her," he said, nodding toward Amara. "Leave it be." Jonas, Amara's eyes flicked between them, her stomach twisting. The name meant nothing to her, but the way Caleb said it, hard, laced with warning, told her this wasn't a friendly reunion. She grabbed Caleb's arm, her fingers digging into his damp sleeve. "What's he talking about?" Before Caleb could answer, Jonas laughed, a harsh sound that grated against the storm. "Oh, she don't know. Does she? You didn't tell her about Red Hollow, about what you did." He took a step closer, his boots squelching in the mud. "This man ain't who you think, lady. He's got debts that don't wash away with a little rain." Amara's grip tightened, her pulse hammering. "Caleb, talk to me. Now." He turned to her, his face a mix of guilt and resolve, rain streaming down his cheeks like tears. "Amara, I swear I'll explain everything. But not here. Not like this." Jonas snorted, spitting into the mud. "Always the charmer. Morrow, you think you can sweet-talk your way out of this one? I ain't leaving till we settle up." The ranch hands had gathered now, drawn by the shouting, their faces a mix of confusion and wariness as they watched from the edge of the corral. Amara felt their eyes on her, the weight of their judgment heavier than the storm. She was about to demand answers when a loud crack split the air, not thunder, but the snap of a fence post giving way under the weight of a panicked steer. The beast charged, its hooves churning the mud, heading straight for Jonas. Caleb moved like lightning, shoving Amara out of the way and tackling Jonas to the ground just as the steer thundered past. The two men landed in a heap, mud splashing everywhere, and for a moment, the scene was almost comical. Two grown men wrestling in the muck like boys in a schoolyard brawl. Amara stifled a laugh, the absurdity cutting through her fear, but it died in her throat when she saw Caleb pin Jonas down, his voice low and fierce. "Stay down, Jonas, or I swear I'll bury you in this mud." Jonas glared up at him, but he didn't fight back, his chest heaving as the rain pounded them both. Amara's heart raced, torn between the chaos unfolding and the nagging questions about Caleb's past. She stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Both of you, get up. This isn't a saloon fight. We're settling this inside." The hands helped drag Jonas to his feet, and Caleb followed, his eyes never leaving the stranger. They trudged to the house, the storm chasing them inside, where the warmth of the kitchen felt jarring after the cold chaos outside. Amara lit a lantern, its glow casting flickering shadows across the room. Jonas slumped into a chair, dripping mud onto her clean floor, while Caleb stood by the door, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Start talking," Amara said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. She looked at Caleb, then Jonas. "One of you better tell me what's going on, or I'll throw you both out into that storm." Jonas smirked, wiping mud from his face with the sleeve. "Go on, Morrow. Tell her about Red Hollow. Tell her how you left a man bleeding in the dirt and ran like a coward." Amara's breath caught, her eyes snapping to Caleb. His face was a storm of its own, guilt and anger warring in those green eyes. "It wasn't like that," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "Amara, I was young, stupid, got mixed up with the wrong folks at Red Hollow. A job went bad, real bad. A man got hurt, and I took the blame. I didn't run because I wanted to. I ran because I had to." Her mind reeled, hurt. What did you do?" Caleb's jaw tightened, and he looked away, the lantern light catching the rain still clinging to his hair. "I didn't kill him, if that's what you're thinking. It was a robbery cattle. Not money. I was just the lookout, barely 20, trying to survive. Things went south, and a rancher got shot. Not by me, but I was there. I took off before they could string me up." Jonas leaned forward, his smirk widening. "And left me to clean up your mess. You owe me. Morrow. That job was my ticket out, and you ruined it." Amara's hands clenched into fists, her mind racing. Caleb, a thief, a fugitive, the man who'd fixed her fences, gentled her horses, carved whistles for kids he couldn't be what Jonas was painting him to be. But doubt gnawed at her, sharp and cold. She turned to Jonas, her voice icy. "Why are you here if Caleb owes you?" "What do you want?" Jonas's eyes gleamed. "Predatory. Money. A cut of what he's got now. This ranch looks mighty prosperous. Figure you can spare a few thousand to keep his secrets buried." The room went silent, the only sound the rain hammering the roof. Amara's heart sank, Vivian's warnings echoing in her head. Was this why Caleb had come to Whispering Pines to hide, to use her? She looked at him, searching for the truth in those eyes she'd come to trust. "Is that true? Caleb, are you here for my money?" He stepped toward her, his voice raw. "No, Amara. I swear on my life, I came here for a fresh start. I didn't know about your money, and I don't care about it. I care about." He stopped. his breath hitching, and the unspoken words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Jonas laughed, breaking the moment. "Oh, this is Rich. You're sweet on her, ain't you? The big, bad Caleb Morrow. Falling for a widow with a fat bank account. Ain't that just poetic?" Amara's cheeks burned. The awkwardness of Jonas's taunt clashing with the drama unfolding. She wanted to snap at him, to throw him out. But the ranch hands were still lingering by the door, their eyes wide with curiosity. One of them, young Tommy, piped up. Ms. Langley, should I fetch the sheriff?" Caleb's head snapped up, panic flashing across his face. And Amara realized the stakes had just gotten higher. Calling the sheriff could unravel everything, not just Caleb's past. But the fragile thing growing between them. She held up a hand, her voice firm. "No sheriff, not yet. Jonas, you're leaving. Now." Jonas stood, his smirk fading as he saw the fire in her eyes. "This ain't over, Morrow," he said, brushing past Caleb and out into the storm. The door slammed behind him, leaving a silence that felt like the calm before a bigger tempest. Amara turned to Caleb, her heart a tangle of trust and doubt. "You've got one chance to tell me the whole truth," she said, her voice trembling. "No more secrets." Caleb nodded, his eyes meeting hers, raw and unguarded. "I will, but not tonight. You deserve more than a half-told story in the middle of a storm." She wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the exhaustion in his face stopped her. Instead, she nodded, her voice soft. "Tomorrow. Then, but if you lie to me, Caleb, you're gone." He didn't reply, just held her gaze, and in that moment she saw something that made her heart ache, a man who'd been running his whole life, searching for a place to stand still. As the rain battered whispering pines, Amara wondered if she could be that place, or if trusting him would be her undoing. The rain had softened to a gentle patter by the time Amara closed the door behind the last of the ranch hands, their boots leaving muddy tracks across her porch. The house was quiet now, save for the distant rumble of thunder and the faint drip of water from the eaves. Caleb stood by the kitchen table, his shirt still clinging to his broad frame, damp from the storm. His promise to tell her the truth tomorrow hung between them, heavy as the air after Jonas's departure. Amara's heart was a tangled mess, doubt warring with desire, fear clashing with the pull she felt every time Caleb's eyes met hers. She should send him back to the barn, keep the distance safe, but her feet didn't move. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice softer than she meant it to be. She busied herself at the stove, avoiding his gaze, the clink of the kettle a small anchor in the storm of her thoughts. Caleb nodded, easing into a chair, his large frame making the simple wooden seat look fragile. "Sounds good. Been a hell of a night." She glanced over her shoulder, catching the way his eyes followed her, warm and steady, like he was memorizing every move. The air in the kitchen felt charged, the lantern's glow casting soft shadows that danced across his face. She poured the coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she set a mug in front of him. Their fingers brushed, and the brief touch sent a jolt through her, warm and electric, stirring something she'd buried deep since Ethan's death. "You're shivering," Caleb said, his voice low, noticing the way her shawl slipped from her shoulder. He stood, moving closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space. "You ought to get out of those wet clothes." Her breath caught, his words innocent but laced with a heat that made her cheeks flush. She should laugh it off, step away, but her body betrayed her, leaning toward him as if drawn by some invisible thread. "I'm fine," she murmured. But her voice wavered, and his eyes darkened, reading the lie in her tone. "Amara," he said, his voice rough, like he was fighting to keep it steady. He reached out, his calloused fingers grazing her arm, and the touch was a spark, igniting something wild and reckless inside her. She froze, her heart pounding, caught between the guilt that clawed at her and the ache that bloomed low in her belly. His hand lingered, warm against her damp skin, and she didn't pull away. The space between them vanished, though neither could say who moved first. His lips found hers, tentative at first, a question asked in the soft press of his mouth. She answered with a sigh, her hands finding his chest, fingers curling into the wet fabric of his shirt. The kiss deepened, hungry and searching, tasting of rain and longing. His hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer, and she felt the solid heat of him, the strength that had steadied her through the storm, now anchoring her in a different kind of chaos. They stumbled back, her back pressing against the kitchen counter, the cool wood a sharp contrast to the warmth of his body. His lips trailed to her jaw, her neck, each touch sending shivers down her spine. She tilted her head, giving him more, her fingers threading through his damp hair. "Caleb," she whispered, half plea, half surrender. And he groaned softly, the sound vibrating against her skin. But the weight of the night of Jonas, of secrets, of Ethan's ghost pressed in, and she pulled back, breathless, her hand still on his chest. "We can't," she said, her voice trembling with want and fear. "Not like this. Not with everything." Caleb's eyes searched hers, his breath ragged, his hand still resting lightly on her hips. "I know," he said, his voice thick with restraint. "I don't want to push you, Amara, but I can't pretend I don't feel this. I've never felt anything like it." Her heart twisted, torn between the truth in his words and the doubts Jonas had planted. She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself, the space between them cold and aching. "You said you'd tell me everything tomorrow," she said, her voice steadier now. "I need to know who you are, Caleb, all of it." He nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes never leaving hers. "You will. I swear it. I've got no more running left in me, not from you." The sincerity in his voice was a lifeline, but it wasn't enough, not yet. She gestured toward the door, her voice soft but firm. "Go get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." He hesitated, then tipped his hat, a small gesture that felt achingly familiar. "Good night, Amara," he said, and stepped back into the rain, the door closing softly behind him. She stood there, her fingers touching her lips where his kiss still lingered, her body alive with a heat she hadn't known in years. The kitchen felt too small, the house too quiet, and her mind raced with the memory of his touch, his taste, the way his hands had felt like they belonged on her. But Jonas's words echoed two debts: Red Hollow, a man bleeding in the dirt. Who was Caleb Morrow? Really? And why did her heart insist on trusting him when her head screamed to run the next morning? The storm had passed, leaving whispering pines bathed in a golden haze. Amara was up before dawn, her nerves frayed, her body still humming from the night before. She found Caleb in the barn, already at work. His shirt rolled to his elbows as he repaired a broken stall. He looked up as she approached, his eyes wary but warm, and she felt that pull again, undeniable and dangerous. "You ready to talk?" she asked, crossing her arms, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. He set down his hammer, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "But not here. Let's ride out somewhere quiet." She nodded, and they saddled 2 horses, riding out to a secluded meadow where the pines whispered secrets to the wind. The air was crisp, the grass still damp from the storm, and the world felt clean, new, fragile. Caleb dismounted, tying his horse to a tree, and Amara followed, her heart pounding as they faced each other under the wide, open sky. "I was 16 when I left the orphanage," he began, his voice steady but laced with pain. "No family, no name. Just a kid trying to survive. Red Hollow was a rough town, and I fell in with a crew running cattle jobs, some legal, some not. Jonas was part of it, always pushing for more, bigger scores. One night, we hit a ranch, and it went wrong. The rancher pulled a gun, and one of our crew shot him. I didn't pull the trigger, Amara, but I was there. I ran, and I've been running ever since." She listened, her chest tight, watching the way his hands clenched and unclenched, the way his eyes searched hers for judgment. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp. "You let me think you were just a ranch hand." Because Hawkins's eyes widened. "I didn't know how to tell you. Didn't know if you'd believe me or if you'd care. I came here to start over. Amara, I never meant to bring my past to your door." Her throat tightened, the weight of his story settling over her like a heavy quilt. She wanted to reach for him, to ease the pain in his voice, but the memory of last night's kiss, the heat of his hands, made her hesitate. Could she trust a man with a past like that? Could she love him as they stood in the meadow, the wind carrying the scent of pine and possibility? Amara felt the ground shift beneath her. Caleb's truth had laid him bare, and now it was her turn to decide, would she let fear keep her heart locked away? Or would she take a chance on the man who'd awakened her in ways she'd thought were lost forever? The meadow stretched out around Amara and Caleb, a sea of green swaying under the morning breeze, the scent of pine sharp and clean. Caleb's confession hung between them, his past laid bare like the open sky above, his words raw, heavy with the weight of years spent running, echoed in Amara's mind, mingling with the memory of his lips on hers, the heat of his hands in the rain-soaked kitchen. She stood a few paces away, her arms crossed, her heart a battlefield of trust and fear. Could she love a man who'd carried such secrets? Could she let herself want him? Knowing what he'd done, Caleb watched her, his green eyes steady but vulnerable, waiting for her to speak. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft snort of the horses grazing nearby. Finally, she took a breath, her voice low but firm. "I need time. Caleb, you've given me the truth, but it's a lot to carry. I don't know what this means for us." He nodded, his jaw tight, but his eyes didn't waver. "I'll wait, Amara, as long as it takes. I meant what I said. I'm done running." She wanted to believe him, wanted to bridge the gap between them, but the shadow of Red Hollow loomed large. She turned toward her horse, ready to ride back, when a rustle in the trees stopped her cold. Caleb's head snapped up, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. "Stay behind me," he murmured, his voice sharp with warning. Before she could respond, a figure stepped from the pines, not Jonas, as she'd half expected, but a woman. She was tall, her dark hair streaked with grey, her face weathered but striking, with eyes that burned like embers. She wore a long coat, dust-stained and patched, and carried a rifle slung over her shoulder with an ease that spoke of years handling it. Amara's heart lurched, her instinct screaming that this was no ordinary visitor. "Caleb Morrow," the woman said, her voice low and smoky, carrying a weight that made the air feel thicker. "Never thought I'd see you standing still." Caleb's face went pale, a reaction Amara hadn't seen from him before, not even when Jonas had confronted him in the storm. "Lila," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Amara's eyes darted between them, her stomach twisting. "Who is she?" "Caleb," she asked, her voice sharp, though she dreaded the answer. The woman Lila smiled, a slow knowing curve of her lips that sent a chill down Amara's spine. "He didn't tell you about me. I'm not surprised." Caleb's always been good at leaving things out. She stepped closer, her boots crunching on the grass, her gaze flicking to Amara with a mix of curiosity and something darker. "I'm Lila Kane, his sister." Amara's breath caught, the word sister hitting like a thunderclap. Sister Caleb had said he grew up in an orphanage, alone, with no family. Her mind reeled, the ground shifting beneath her as she turned to him. "You said you had no one." "You lied." Caleb's hands clenched into fists, his eyes locked on Lila, a storm of emotions flashing across his face, shock, guilt, anger. "I didn't lie," he said, his voice rough. "I thought you were dead." "Lila, they told me you were gone after the fire at the orphanage. I looked for you, I swear." Lila's smile faded, her eyes narrowing. "You didn't look hard enough. I survived, Caleb, clawed my way out of that hell and made a life. And now I find you here, playing house with a rich widow, while I've been scraping by, chasing the ghost of my little brother." Amara's heart pounded, the revelation spinning her world off its axis. Caleb had a sister, a living, breathing family he'd never mentioned. The betrayal stung, sharp and cold, but the pain in his eyes told her there was more to this story. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "Why are you here? Lila, if you're his sister, what do you want?" Lila's gaze shifted to Amara, sizing her up. "I heard about Whispering Pines, heard about the money, the land, and then I heard my brother was here, working for you." Her voice hardened, edged with something bitter. "I came to see if he'd finally found what he was looking for, or if he was just running again." Caleb took a step toward her, his voice low and urgent. "I'm not running. Lila, not anymore. I came here to start over, to be better. I didn't know you were alive, or I'd have found you." Lila's laugh was sharp, cutting. "Start over with her." She nodded toward Amara, her eyes glinting with something that felt like a challenge. "You think you can just walk away from Red Hollow? From what we did, that rancher didn't just get shot. Caleb, he died. And you left me to face the fallout." Amara's blood ran cold, the air sucked from her lungs. "Died," Caleb had said. The man was hurt, not killed. She turned to him, her voice trembling. "Is that true? The man in Red Hollow, he's dead." Caleb's face crumpled, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear. "I didn't know," he said, his voice breaking. "I swear. Amara, I didn't know he died. I ran before I heard. I was a kid, scared out of my mind. I thought he'd pull through." Lila's eyes softened, just for a moment, but her voice stayed hard. "You left me to deal with the posse. Caleb, I was 16, same as you. I took the blame. Said it was my idea, so they wouldn't come after you. I've been paying for it ever since." Amara's mind raced, the pieces of Caleb's past snapping into place, each one sharper than the last. He hadn't just been a lookout, he'd been part of something that ended a man's life. And Lila, his sister, had carried the burden he'd left behind. She wanted to scream, to demand why he'd kept this from her. But the pain in his eyes held her back. He wasn't the man she'd thought, not entirely, but he wasn't a monster either. "Lila," Caleb said, his voice raw. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'll make it right. Whatever it takes." Lila shook her head, her rifle still slung over her shoulder, a reminder of the life she'd lived. "It ain't that simple. I'm not here to drag you back to Red Hollow. I'm here because I need your help. There's a debt still hanging over me, men who think I owe them for what went down. They're coming, Caleb. And if they find you here, they'll burn this place to the ground." Amara's heart stopped, the threat landing like a stone in her chest. Whispering Pines her home. Her legacy was in danger because of Caleb's past. She looked at him, searching for the man who'd steadied her in the storm, who'd kissed her with a tenderness that had awakened her heart. Was he worth this risk? Could she trust him to protect her, to protect everything she'd built, Caleb? She said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "If you're staying, you need to tell me everything, no more secrets. And we need to figure out how to keep this ranch safe." He nodded, his eyes meeting hers, filled with a determination that made her breath catch. "I'm with you, Amara. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Lila watched them, her expression unreadable, but a flicker of something respect maybe crossed her face. "You've got yourself a fighter," she said to Amara, her voice softer now. "Don't let him break your heart." As Lila turned back toward the pines, her coat blending with the shadows, Amara felt the weight of the twist that had upended her world. Caleb's sister. A dead man. A looming threat she'd thought she was choosing between love and fear. But now it was about survival. The meadow felt smaller now, the pines closing in. And as she and Caleb mounted their horses to ride back to Whispering Pines, she knew nothing would ever be the same. The ride back to Whispering Pines was silent, the only sounds the steady clop of hooves and the rustle of wind through the pines. Amara's mind churned with Lila's words, debts, danger, men who could burn her ranch to the ground. Caleb rode beside her, his broad shoulders tense, his green eyes fixed on the horizon as if he could see the trouble coming. The revelation of his sister, the truth about the rancher's death, had cracked something open between them, and Amara wasn't sure if it was trust or something more fragile. As the ranch came into view, its weathered fences and sprawling fields glowing in the late morning light, she felt the weight of her home settle over her. This was her sanctuary, her legacy. And now it was a target. They dismounted in the yard, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and hay. The ranch hands were scattered about, repairing storm damage, their glances flickering toward Caleb with a mix of curiosity and unease. Word of the confrontation with Jonas had spread, and Amara could feel the tension rippling through the air. She led Caleb to the porch, her boots heavy on the steps, determined to keep this conversation private. But before she could speak, the door swung open, and Vivian stood there, her arms crossed, her lips pursed in that familiar judgmental scowl. "Amara," Vivian said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I heard about last night, a stranger threatening you, cattle running wild." And she jabbed a finger at Caleb at the center of it all. "What's next? A shootout in the yard?" Amara's patience snapped, frayed by the morning's revelations. "Vivian, unless you're here to help, keep your nose out of my business. I've got enough to deal with." Vivian's eyes widened, but she didn't back down. "Help, I'm trying to save you from yourself." This man's trouble. Amara. First Jonas, now some woman shows up in the meadow. The whole town's buzzing about it. They're saying you're harboring a criminal. Caleb stiffened, his hand twitching at his side, but he kept his voice calm. "Ma'am, I'm no criminal. I've made mistakes, but I'm not here to hurt anyone, least of all Amara." Vivian snorted, her gaze raking over him. "Mistakes. That's what you call it. I heard about Red Hollow. A man died, and you ran, and now you're dragging my brother's widow into your mess." Amara stepped between them, her heart pounding, the air crackling with tension. "Enough. Vivian, Caleb's staying until I say otherwise. If you can't handle that, you know where the road is." The words hung heavy, and for a moment Vivian looked like she'd been slapped. Then her eyes narrowed, a sly glint creeping in. "Fine, but don't come crying to me when this blows up in your face, and it will. Amara, mark my words." She spun on her heel, nearly tripping over a loose board on the porch, and stormed off to her car, muttering about foolish widows and no good drifters. Caleb let out a low chuckle, the sound surprising Amara in the midst of the drama. "She's got a flair for the dramatic, don't she?" Amara's lips twitched, a spark of humor cutting through her frustration. That's Vivian. She'd turn a spilled coffee into a Shakespearean tragedy. She shook her head, the moment of levity fading as she turned to him. "But she's not wrong about the talk. Caleb, and now with Lila. What are we up against?" He ran a hand through his hair, his expression grim. "Lila's right about one thing. There's men out there who think I owe them. Not just Jonas. The crew from Red Hollow. They've been hunting me, thinking I took off with the haul from that job. I didn't. Amara, I swear it. But they're not the kind to listen." Her stomach twisted, the threat to whisper in pines growing sharper. "And Lila, where does she fit in?" Caleb sighed, leaning against the porch rail, his eyes distant. "She was always the strong one, even as kids. After the orphanage fire, I thought I'd lost her. Finding out she's alive, it's a miracle and a curse. She's been running. Same as me, but she's tougher. Meaner, maybe. If she says trouble's coming, it's coming." Amara's chest tightened, the weight of it all pressing down. She was about to ask more when young Tommy, the ranch hand, bounded up the steps, his face flushed with excitement. "Ms. Langley, you gotta see this. The new colt's trying to walk, but he's wobbling like he's drunk on moonshine." Amara couldn't help but laugh, the image breaking the tension like a ray of sunlight through storm clouds. "All right, Tommy, Lead the way." She glanced at Caleb, a silent agreement passing between them. They'd face the heavy stuff, but first they'd take this moment in the stable. The colt was indeed a sight, its spindly legs trembling as it tried to stand, only to flop back into the hay with the indignant whinny. Caleb knelt beside it, his hands gentle as he steadied the little creature, his low chuckle filling the space. "He's got spirit," he said, glancing at Amara. "Reminds me of someone." She raised an eyebrow, a playful spark in her eyes. "Careful." "Morrow, I might take that as a compliment." His grin was slow, warm, and it stirred that dangerous heat in her chest, the memory of their kiss flaring bright. But the moment was cut short by a shout from the yard. "Amara, we got company." It was one of the hands, his voice edged with urgency. They hurried outside, Caleb's hand brushing hers as they moved, a fleeting touch that sent her pulse racing. In the yard stood Lila, her rifle still slung over her shoulder. But she wasn't alone. 2 men flanked her, both rough-looking, with hard eyes and hands resting on the guns at their hips. Amara's heart sank. These were no ranch hands. These were the men from Red Hollow. The ones Lila had warned about. Amara Langley, one of them, called, his voice gruff, his hat tilted low. "We're here for Caleb Morrow. Hand him over, and we'll leave your pretty ranch in one piece." Caleb stepped forward, shielding Amara, his voice steady but laced with steel. "You got business with me, you deal with me. Leave her out of it." The man smirked, spitting into the dirt. "Ain't that simple. Morrow, you owe us money. Blood, don't much matter which. And we hear you're cozying up to a rich widow. Makes things real interesting." Amara's blood boiled, the implication stinging. She opened her mouth to retort, but Lila cut in, her voice sharp. "Back off, Rafe. This ain't about her. You want to settle this. You talk to me and Caleb." The man Rafe laughed, but it was cold, dangerous. "Oh, we'll talk, Lila. But first, let's see how much this ranch is worth to your brother's new sweetheart." The hands had gathered now, their faces tense, some reaching for tools that could double as weapons. Amara's mind raced, the awkwardness of the moment clashing with the rising danger. She'd faced storms, stampedes, and Vivian's wrath. But this was different. This was a fight she hadn't chosen. She glanced at Caleb, his eyes fierce with a protectiveness that made her heart ache. He'd promised to face this with her, but as Rafe's hand twitched toward his gun, she wondered if they'd walk away from this or if Whispering Pines would become a battlefield. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing wind, "whatever happens, don't let them take you." His hand found hers, squeezing briefly, a silent vow. "I'm not going anywhere. Amara. Not now. Not ever." As the men stepped closer, their boots kicking up dust, Amara braced herself, the ranch's future and her heart hanging in the balance. The dust swirled in the yard of Whispering Pines, stirred by the boots of the 2 men from Red Hollow, their hands hovering near their guns. Rafe's smirk was a blade, cutting through the tense air as he faced Caleb, his words dripping with menace. Amara's heart thundered, her hand still tingling from Caleb's brief, reassuring squeeze. The ranch hands stood ready, clutching tools like makeshift weapons, their loyalty to her a quiet strength. Lila, rifle still slung over her shoulder, stood like a sentinel, her eyes darting between Caleb and the intruders. The ranch, Amara's home. Her heart was a powder keg, and one wrong move could set it ablaze. Caleb stepped forward, his broad frame a shield between Amara and the danger. "Rafe," he said, his voice steady as iron. "You want me? Fine. But this ranch, these people, they're not part of our fight. Let's take this somewhere else." Rafe's laugh was harsh, echoing across the yard. "You don't get to make demands. Morrow, you ran off with our score, left us to rot. Now you're living high on this widow's dime. We'll take what's owed one way or another." Amara's blood boiled, the insult to her and Caleb igniting a fire she couldn't contain. "You're on my land," she snapped, stepping beside Caleb, her voice ringing clear. "You think you can waltz in here and threaten us? Whispering Pines doesn't bend to bullies." The second man, silent until now, shifted, his hand twitching toward his gun. But Lila was faster, her rifle snapping up in a fluid motion, the barrel trained on him. "Move, and you're done," she said, her voice cold as the steel in her hands. "This ends now. Rafe, you want blood, you'll get it, but it won't be Caleb's." The standoff stretched, the air thick with the promise of violence. Amara's pulse roared in her ears, but she held her ground, her eyes locked on Caleb's, drawing strength from the fierce determination in his gaze. Then, from the edge of the yard, a new sound broke the tension, the crunch of gravel under tires. Vivian's car rolled up, her face pale as she took in the scene. For once, her sharp tongue was silent, but her presence was a spark in the dry grass. "Amara," Vivian called, stepping out, her voice trembling but firm. "What in God's name is happening?" Rafe's eyes flicked to her, a predator sensing weakness. Another guest. "This just gets better." Caleb's jaw tightened, but Amara saw an opportunity. "Vivian," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos, "get the sheriff, now." Vivian hesitated, her eyes darting between Amara and the armed men, but something in Amara's gaze, steel forged from years of holding this ranch together, spurred her into action. She nodded, diving back into her car, the engine roaring as she sped off. Rafe cursed, his composure cracking, and Amara knew they had to act fast. "Lila," Caleb said, his voice low, "we can't let this turn bloody. Not here." Lila's eyes softened, just for a moment, the bond between siblings flickering through her hard exterior. "Then talk fast, little brother. Make it right." Caleb turned to Rafe, his hands raised, palms open. "I didn't take your money." "Rafe never did. The haul from Red Hollow was lost when the posse came. I ran to save my skin. Same as you, but I'll make this right name your price, and I'll work it off. No one else gets hurt." Rafe's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. "You think I trust you after you left us high and dry? You don't have to trust me," Caleb said, his voice steady. "Trust her." He nodded toward Amara, his eyes meeting hers with a warmth that made her heart ache. "She's given me a chance to be better. I'm not throwing that away." Amara's breath caught, the weight of his words settling deep. She stepped closer, her voice firm. "If it's money you want, I'll pay. But you leave my ranch, my people, and Caleb alone." Rafe hesitated, his greed warring with his pride. Lila lowered her rifle slightly, her voice cutting in. "Take the deal, Rafe, or you'll be answering to me and I don't miss." The tension held for a heartbeat, then another, until Rafe spat into the dirt, his shoulders slumping. "Fine. 10,000. And we're square." Amara nodded, her mind already calculating. It was a steep price, but Whispering Pines was worth it, and so was Caleb. "You'll have it by sundown. Now get off my land." Rafe and his partner backed away, their eyes wary, and Lila followed, her rifle still at the ready, until they disappeared down the road. The yard fell silent, the hands exhaling in relief, their tools clattering to the ground. Amara turned to Caleb, her heart racing, 1,000 questions in her eyes. "Lila," Caleb said, turning to his sister, "you didn't have to do that." Lila's smile was faint, almost sad. "Yeah, I did. You're my brother, Caleb. I've lost you once. Not again." She slung her rifle over her shoulder, her gaze softening as she looked at Amara. "Take care of him. He's a pain, but he's worth it." Amara's throat tightened, and she nodded. "I will." Lila tipped her hat and walked toward the pines, her figure fading into the trees. Amara knew she might not see her again, but the weight of Lila's sacrifice for Caleb, for her, lingered like a promise. Days turned to weeks, and Whispering Pines began to heal. The hands worked with renewed vigor, the fences stronger, the cattle thriving. Caleb stayed, his hands steady as he rebuilt what the storm and the standoff had broken. Amara watched him from the porch, her heart lighter with each passing day. The ghost of Ethan fading into a warm memory rather than a chain. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of fire, Caleb found her in the kitchen, her hands flour-dusted from baking. He hesitated at the door, his hat in his hands, his eyes nervous but bright. "Amara," he said, his voice soft, "I've been thinking. About us. About what comes next." She wiped her hands on her apron, her heart skipping, and he stepped closer, his large frame filling the space, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I love you. Have for a while now. I don't have much, just these hands and a past I'm trying to make right. But if you'll have me, I want to build a life here. With you." Her breath caught, tears prickling her eyes. She'd fought so hard to hold on to Whispering Pines, to honor Ethan, but now she saw a new path, one where love wasn't a betrayal, but a beginning. "Caleb," she said, stepping into his arms, "I love you too." His kiss was gentle at first, then fierce, a promise sealed in the quiet of the kitchen. Weeks later, they stood before a judge in town, their vows simple but true, the ring on her finger a symbol of a love that had weathered storms and secrets. The town's whispers faded, even Vivian softening when Amara shared the news of her pregnancy. 3 months later, a child, a new life, growing beneath her heart. As winter turned to spring, Amara and Caleb sat on the porch, the ranch sprawling before them, alive with the hum of cattle and the laughter of the hands. Caleb's hand rested on her belly, his touch warm and steady, his eyes bright with a future neither had dared dream of. Whispering Pines was no longer a prison but a home, its fields a testament to their love, their resilience. The sun sank low, casting a golden glow over the land, and Amara leaned into Caleb, her heart full. They'd faced loss, danger, and doubt, but together they'd found something stronger, a love that turned a lonely widow and a wandering cowboy into a family. Bound by the pines that whispered their story to the stars,